Hi there, this is Steve Yarbrough, and I want to welcome you to another of my Mega Live fishing videos. This one's going to be a departure from what I've done in the past. In the past, all my videos have been in trolling mode with Mega Live, where I'm trolling and the Mega Live is pointing back, looking at my lures and fish in the water column. I've had a lot of questions about Mega Live landscape mode in the traditional usage, which is basically scanning the bottom for fish. So that's what I'm going to be doing this time. I found an area. I don't have a lot of flat areas in my lake, but I found an area with about 6 to 7 foot of water with a little bit of a depression and a very few fish, but I think it'll get the point across. So that's what I'm going to use. I did a sonar recording about 2 minutes, and that's going to be the foundation of this. Let me talk about now what you see on your screen here. So along the bottom are feet, and everything else up the side and across the top are degrees or angles. So if you look at this, the Mega Live is going out basically to 70 degrees each side, which is a 140 degree span. So I know a lot of people have wondered, what is the width of the beam? It appears to me that it's about 140 degrees. Between 120 and 140, you lose definite resolution. So I would say 120 is solid, but it definitely goes out to 140 degrees. And then I've overlaid in this still here the radial grid so that we can talk about as things appear. In this one, there is a fish that I've marked with the word fish right at the 30 degree, left 30 degree mark. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start out with a complete, it's about a 2-minute segment. We'll watch through that at the settings that I think are optimized for me. Now, one thing I'll tell you is what I found is the color palette I like for trolling, which is 11, did not work as well in the traditional landscape mode. And what I liked personally was 12, but we'll go through and we'll do a lot of tweaks and we'll select different color palettes, and I'll just show you how to tune this thing for best performance. A couple of last things before we move on. First, I want to say I'm not really set up to do this kind of usage for landscape. I don't even have a mount that rotates because I have mine in a fixed position. So I basically was holding this down in the water on the shaft and just manually turning it with my hand while it was sort of not attached to anything. So not the best situation in the world, but I think the quality came out okay even with that. And the second thing is, when I did the sonar recording, I did that at a 70-foot border, so, or 70-foot range. So what you'll see in these recordings is that's where sort of you see the semicircle there where it ends. When you're actually fishing live with Mega Live in landscape mode, you don't see that border. It just fills the screen with whatever range you set it at. So, but when you do a sonar playback, it comes back like this, where it chops off everything beyond whatever you have the range set at. So with that, let's move forward. This is the playback of the sonar recording. You'll see that fish between the 30 and 45 on the left there. He was pretty much hugging the bottom. And you'll see I'm coming up on a slight depression. It wasn't very deep. You'll see the other side of it start appearing. And then you'll see a fish between the 30 and 45 degree. There he is. He started out a little high in the water column and then progressed down as he continued in that depression. And you'll see in a second, here comes the sonar shadow, and it gets closer and closer and closer to him. And that's a surefire way of knowing where the fish is in relation to the bottom, is how close the shadow is. In a second, you'll see on the left, way out to the periphery at about the 70-foot border here, you'll see a couple of fish start showing up. I had no clue these fish were here. I'm just sort of moving the transducer around, seeing if I can find anything, and here they are. Because the settings I had really were blown out because they were what I use for trolling. So anyhow, they appeared. That's the depression there in the middle that I just floated over. And you'll see the fish will disappear basically at the 70-foot border. On this and all the future recordings, I'm going to remove the grid, and I'm extending the range out to 100 feet so that my menu doesn't overlap. So what we're doing here is we're going to change the sensitivity to see what impact that has on the image. And what I'm going to do is just sort of go back and forth between 15 or 10 and 20 in that range, just to see what difference that makes as the fish appear, and as the bottom, to see how it changes the bottom and the fish. So I'm just going to go back and forth with sensitivity. You can see here comes the shadow. As I change the sensitivity, it gets really hard to see the shadow. Again, I liked it at 20. And I think although you see the bottom more, you're going to see shadows. You're going to see more detail in my mind. So here in a second, the fish are going to show up on the border. And again, we'll see how the sensitivity impacts how you can pick up the fish. As you go down, the fish still appear, but they just don't appear quite as bright, which you would expect between about 10 and 20. So there's the depression again. Going to go back, and so again, I liked 20 on this one. Now I'm going to adjust the contrast to see what impact that has. And as you can see, what happens is it really pixelates the bottom, if you will, and the bottom disappears as well. And the fish gets harder and harder to pick up as well. Again, on this one, I liked having the sensitivity or the contrast on 1. I felt that worked the best. You can still see the fish when you ramp up the contrast, but it just totally sort of changes the image. You can't see the shadow of the fish as it's coming across here as you go up with contrast. So again, I just felt that contrast 1 was the best setting for this color palette. Now that may vary with other color palettes. And that's why you've got to play with all the factors. So here comes the fish. You can actually see the fish pretty well with the contrast turned up, but again, you just sort of lose all other pieces of the equation, and I just don't think it works as well. Now I'm going to take a look at the dynamic contrast to see what impact that has. So I'll just rotate between off, 1, and 2. You'll see that off 2 is the dimmest, 1 is the brightest, and off is in between. Personally, I liked off for this mode. I just felt it didn't blow out the bottom. It did a good job of bringing things out. So you'll see again. Here's the shadow. Can't hardly see it in 2. It's a little blown out in 1, and again, I think off is the best personally. But again, that's a matter of taste and what your preference is. So here in a second, we're going to see the fish showing up on the 70-foot border and come across, and again, off 1 and 2 on the dynamic contrast. Definitely 1, the bottom just sort of blows out everything, in my opinion. So it's sort of between 2 and off, and again, I prefer the off in this case. Now we're going to look at the impact of color palettes. Again, my favorite was 12. We're going to do this in 2 phases. First, I'm going to look at 7 through 12. And actually, of the color palettes, I still like 12 the best, but 9 is actually sort of interesting. It really minimizes the bottom and the impact of the bottom. That's 9 right there. You'll just see that they all differ in how they present the image. Here comes the shadow. Now the shadow you don't see very well in 9, but I do like how the fish look in 9. But 9 requires some different settings on sensitivity and contrast as well. So soon the fish here come the fish at the 70-foot border. You'll see again the difference in the various color palettes and how they look, and very, very different. couple of the color palettes, I'm not sure when I would ever use them, but like that bright green one, but I'm sure there's a use somewhere. Now I'll take a look at the first 6 color palettes, 1 through 6. And again, these are, I would say, the more traditional ones that people tend to use a lot. Color palette 1, 2, 3, and 4 are ones that people typically use for side imaging, for down imaging, etc. And, they have value here as well. You can see the fish coming across the depression. Different ones, again, have the bottom, more blown out. Here comes the shadow across. Probably more visible in this one than in some of the lower color palettes or the higher number color palettes that we did a minute ago. And then here in a second, we'll see the fish coming again at the 70-foot border. And that one, some of them blow it out so you really can't even hardly see the fish. Other ones do a pretty decent job. Again, there's the depression. Of these, I sort of like number 1, and we'll use that one in our next segment to try to tune to a different color palette. Now I'm going to take the blue number 1 palette and see if we can get it tuned a little better. So first I'm going to change sensitivity and see what impact that has on the blue color palette. So as I take it down, the bottom disappears, but the fish sort of does too. So sensitivity, I think I would still have up pretty high. Now there is some artifacts if you have it all the way up to 20 in that depression. So taking it down to about 15 or so seems to actually do a better job, and you're not paying a penalty on the shadow and being able to see the shadow at about 15. So on this one, I think I would settle for 15 being about the right sort of blend of bottom showing up and fish showing up and still seeing the shadow. Now I'm doing contrast, and you can see the impact of contrast. The bottom sort of goes away and you just get specks, if you will. So again, from a contrast standpoint, I think I would leave it on the 1 to get the smoothest representation of the bottom. And finally, I'm going to take a look at the dynamic contrast and the impact that has. I've got it set to 15 on the sensitivity and 1 on the contrast, and now I'm just going to cycle through between off, 1, and 2. And you'll see again, off is sort of the mid position, 1 is the brightest, and 2 is the dimmest. 2, I think, for this blue color palette is too dim. I would probably go with either off or 1 on this one. Either one of those, I'm still seeing the shadow, but I think the off position, the bottom doesn't overpower things. So I think I probably would settle on off for dynamic contrast with the blue color palette, just like I did in the green number 12. So here comes the fish coming at the 15 or the border here, and again on 2 they pretty much disappear, and so again I think I would have it on off would be my preference here as well. I hope this has been beneficial. I plan to do another one, and I'll find an area that has maybe a little bit more interesting topology on the bottom to get sort of the balance between finding fish and resolution of the bottom. Again, this is not my primary mode of fishing, so I'm a little bit out of my element, but I did want to provide this for the people that have been requesting that I take a look at the traditional landscape mode, looking at the bottom and looking at fish on the bottom.